with Anna Maria Chávez. I will start off by giving a little background on Ana. Such an honor to have you with us here today. Ana is an Arizona native and serves as the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the National School Boards Association, NSBA. She is also an ex officio director on its board of directors. To advance the association's mission, serve its members, and champion educational equity, Chávez leads a team of policy, member services, legal, communications, and business experts. Prior to joining NSBA, she was the Executive Vice President and Chief Growth Officer for the National Council on Aging, where she oversaw the day-to-day operations. Chávez developed her leadership skills growing up in Eloy, Arizona. So we're very excited to have an Arizona girl with us who is doing great work in DC that would propel her into a career in public service. Her desire to transform the world through servant leadership led her to Yale University before pursuing a Juris Doctorate at the University of Arizona. She has held numerous posts in President Bill Clinton's administration, and later returned to Arizona to serve then Governor Janet Napolitano as the first woman of color to be named, and was the first woman of color to be named CEO of the Girl Scouts of the United States, where she served from 2011 to 2016. In 2016, she was named one of the world's 50 greatest leaders by Fortune magazine, cited for her vision and creativity in working to revitalize the Girl Scouts brand for a new century, and was named number 22 by Fast Company in its annual list of most creative people in business. Most recently, she was named by Forbes magazine on the inaugural 50 over 50 leaders list. Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm a little tired.
I know, you're a little tired.
A little tired.
You've been doing so much incredible work. It is such a privilege to have you here with us today. Would love to just hear a little bit more about you. Obviously, we have your background, but would love to hear it from your lens and what led you to a career in education advocacy.
Well, first of all, thank you for allowing me to be here with you. You're doing a terrific job. I can't believe you've only been in this role 1 year, and the amount of success and impact you and your team have had here in Arizona is tremendous. So congratulations.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure spending time with you here today at Central High School and visiting with other school board members, individuals who put their name on a ballot, to represent community. And really, that's what brought me to this role. That and the fact my mother was actually a school board member when I was growing up. My big claim of achievement was I was her campaign manager at the age of 8. My job was to hang her school board election signs up all over Eloy. And she won, and she would drag me to all the public meetings. And she was then elected to the community college boards, Central Arizona College. And so from a very early age, I got a wonderful appreciation for education. And my dad, who was an immigrant from Mexico, was very focused that his 3 children, my 2 brothers and myself, would get a great education. And he did it. He and my mom sacrificed. And I'm proud to say that of his 3 children, 2 of us went to Ivy League schools.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's incredible.
That's what an education will do.
That's incredible. And I shared this with you earlier. I feel like we have different stories and unique stories as Latinos in the community, but we also have very similar stories, right? And parents who are super committed to our educational attainment, wanting what's best for us and doing everything that they can so that we are successful. Along your journey, did you face any challenges to get to where you are? What barriers? And
what day of the week? Absolutely. I mean, I think that now, because I'm on the list, 50 over 50, in my 50s, I go back and I look over my career because I've always, well, it's fortunate or unfortunate, I've always been the first of in these roles. I've basically taken on a career of being hired to be the first person of color in a role of a legacy organization. And most likely I'm coming in because I'm having to change the trajectory of the organization, whether it's in membership decline, whether the revenue model hasn't been working for a decade. And so what I found is when you take on those change agent roles, you are jumping into such complicated ecosystems and different stakeholder groups, and you're normally coming in from the outside.
Sure.
And so I've learned so many great lessons. I've also, innovated and failed and picked myself back up because, again, if you're not doing something to change every day, then you're not stretching, you're not learning, and you're not transforming.
Right, absolutely. And so do you think some of these challenges, you mentioned being the first person of color in a lot of roles. How has being even a woman of color, a Latina in specifically, how has or have the challenges been tied to your identity that way?
Well, I think it's, I can't be anything I'm not. So I'm going to come to these roles both as a woman, as a mother, as a wife, as a Latina. But you're also having to represent the full stakeholder base. So Absolutely. That's very important. I also think I come to these roles with an understanding that, again, I'm coming in. I've been hired by the organization to drive massive transformational change. That's why I get hired to do these roles. And so part of it is understanding you're coming in, respecting the legacy of the organization, but also ensuring the organization is building for the future.
Sure.
And for the population you have to serve in the future. And in education, if you look at the data, and I've read your reports here in Arizona, we know that the growing demographic of children in Arizona are Latino children. And so for me, it's understanding how does this shift in demographics across the country, how does it impact? And I look at it from the leadership lens, right? Ensuring, as my mother did back in, again, the 70s and 80s in Southern Arizona, ensuring that she was there running for office and serving at the director's table to make sure that everybody was being considered, right? And so that's what I think we do. I think it's what we bring to our roles.
Absolutely. And that's actually, it brings me to the next question around our theory of change at All in Education we shared with you is that we believe that if we're going to close the attainment gap that exists in education for Latino students, we have to also simultaneously work to close the representation gap in who is leading our classrooms, who's leading our boardrooms, both at the local and state level, to make sure that, like you just said, that our voice and perspective is heard. Would you, from your experience, would you agree that will help us build a more equitable and just education system?
Absolutely.
Having leaders of color.
I'll give you a very specific example. Unfortunately, because I started this role in the pandemic, I've yet to meet my entire staff. I've yet to meet my national board. And I've only made a couple of visits into this. I've been to South Carolina, and I most recently went to Massachusetts. And I was very honored to be hosted by a couple of members of my national board. And they set up a roundtable of other female leaders in the community. And there was this one particular elected official. She was fantastic. And she told me a really relevant story to this point. She said that they were sitting around the table discussing what would happen in the fall. Would they reopen? Would it be hybrid? Would it be in person? How were they going to use the Federal Relief Act money to make sure that the kids are supported? And they were taking a vote on actually creating an all virtual school. They weren't going to go back and forth. It was going to be all virtual. Mm-hmm. And they were about to take the vote, and she raised her hand. She said, well, but if we do that and a large percentage of our children are in free and reduced lunch, how are they going to get fed during the day?
Right.
Because our current laws and regulations say that they cannot use the school buses and being reimbursed to deliver the food.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so she raised the question, and it allowed a conversation then to happen around that school board table to say, wow, I hadn't even thought about that.
Right.
But she, coming from the community, knew because she represented these families, and she knew that one, most of these kids were in households where the parents worked full time, so they were at home alone. Mm-hmm. Two, that they depended on the meals during the classroom day. And three, if it went all virtual, then what did that mean? And so I said, well, how could I help you? She said, well, at the national level, you could work with me to get a waiver to be able to allow
to use the meals.
Yes. That's why I think it's really important to have different perspectives around the leadership table, because we, again, bring those different perspectives to the decisions.
That's such a great example. And, being a school board member during the pandemic was probably the hardest time of my school board career. I always tell folks, like, the night before having to take the vote to close schools, I cried. It was hard. It was the hardest vote, and exactly for that reason, because in Phoenix Union, almost 80% of our population is on free and reduced price lunch. And thinking about the ramifications of our schools closing down, that's a weight that we carry, right?
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you sharing that story, because I think a lot of us felt the weight of those decisions for sure in the last year. What do you think are the biggest barriers that our community faces to accessing quality education? What would you say?
Well, having grown up as a child here, it's the lack of expectation. Well, I think it was I'm hoping it will change, but there was a certain expectation we would only go so far in our education, that it was okay that my counterparts or girls my age would drop out and not go on to college. And so it's literally changing the expectations of adults when they look at children of color, children in poverty, children in underserved populations, to say they have the best opportunity in life if they go through school, they excel, they go on to get their bachelor's, their master's, or their doctorates, and the expectation that they will do that.
Right.
To me, that is the biggest barrier. And having served children for the last 20 years, that's what I've seen. It's when adults give up on the expectations around children because they don't know better. I mean, at the Girl Scouts, the average age of my boss was 8 years old.
Oh,
right.
Right.
And they had the world in front of them. They had dreams that if they could only capture a percentage of them, it would be fantastic. And as I tracked the progression of these girls through our programs, I would see that they would get messages from adults, oh, you're being so bossy. Why are you talking so much in class? And so we again put our own perceptions on what children should do and how they should present themselves. And I think that's the biggest barrier. And I think the second barrier is engaging enough adults to raise their hand to volunteer, whether they're running for elected office, like a school board member, they're voting, or they're volunteering in their schools.
So what role, I guess you kind of answered that. What role do advocates play? Like parents in the community, folks who follow our work at All in Education, other school board members or educators, what role can we play to change culture? Because a lot of what you're saying, like this culture of deficit thinking about our community, right? Mm-hmm. That we are viewing our community from a half glass empty perspective. Mm-hmm. One thing when I joined Phoenix Union that I would always say is like, our community is incredibly diverse here. At Phoenix Union, we are 90% students of color, 82% Latino. There are over 70 languages spoken across the system. So, these are children of immigrants, first generation. And so very diverse community. We see that as an asset, right? We see the diversity of our population as an asset that's worthy of investment, that deserves as much investment as any other community across the state. But that's a culture change that happened at Phoenix Union over time. So how do we change that thinking of thinking about our community from a negative perspective or that deficit thinking? What role do we play as advocates to push the system to value us and to view us as talent worthy of investment?
Well, I think it starts with our own community. How do we show up for each other? Right. Yeah. I think that's a big thing. How do we show up for other women?
Absolutely.
Right? How do you support other female leaders? I also think that we start changing the perceptions around the community by just living out, again, what we feel is our appropriate future and what we want to do. And, again, I'm all about data. I always go back to the data. What does the data say? And if you look at, again, state shared revenue and how we draw down federal money into Arizona, it's how we count the population. And are we ensuring that there's a full census count and that it's fair and it's open and transparent, that the people that you do elect, again, represent the populations that they're living in? And we're, as advocates, we're holding people accountable to follow the data, to make really strategic decisions about our community and the investments in our community. And that's a value proposition, right? That the services that we're being provided are the value that we want to buy. And they're not downgraded for certain reasons or for certain zip codes. So I've seen it change, and having traveled across the country for the last 20 years, I do see a change. I just think, again, if you follow the data, it will continue to shift and continue to show that there will be specific investment required to ensure that at the end of the day, as the children graduate from Central High School, that they are part of a workforce, right? Because as an employer here in Arizona, you're looking for great talent, right? You're looking for somebody to come in with right behavioral skill set, and talent skill set. And for us, I would think everybody would want to ensure that they're prepared to be, in that workforce, creating revenue, not only for that company, but creating wealth for their family and future generations. I think it's a great thing.
Right. Absolutely. Well, take us back. I'd love to hear more about Anna Chávez growing up in Eloy.
Oh, Lord.
And even your college experience. Take us back to when you were a student. What was it like? What challenges did you face? And how did you overcome those challenges as a young woman of color?
Well, first of all, it started with my family. My parents and my grandmother were so supportive. They wanted to ensure that I didn't match the data around me, because unfortunately, the data around my particular population, I was a Head Start baby. They tracked me from a very early age, and they wanted to ensure that I did not replicate the data in the past. And so they were very focused on ensuring I stayed in school, I stayed focused on school. And, I was fortunate that because of that mentorship, that I was able to get the grades in order to get into Yale. And when I got to Yale, it was very different. Obviously, I'd never seen snow before. It doesn't snow here in Arizona. In Eloy, it doesn't snow.
Right.
So I get there, and only 5 students had been admitted from the whole state of Arizona that year.
Wow.
There were prep schools that sent more kids in one year to Yale than the state of Arizona.
Wow.
Yeah, think about that for a minute.
Wow.
And of course, so I get there, and most of the kids in my class freshman year were used to being away from home. They either had gone to boarding school or had families who had gone to Yale before. And so it was a very different environment. And I was fortunate that Yale provided a wraparound service. There were other Hispanic students I was able to get together with. But ultimately, I explored campus. I took the class. I knew I wanted to go to law school. So that was my path. And it was a hard 4 years. I'm not going to lie about it. It was tough. It was very, very tough. But I think if I was able to survive and thrive in that environment, it also taught me that a lot of things were possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, that was your experience as a student years ago, and there's still students that are experiencing that today, right? That you're the first in your family to go to college, or the first to experience insert X, right? When it comes to your education. How do we change that? Like, how do we stop? Like, if we're ever going to get to a place, and it goes back to our goal and our mission as an organization of closing these gaps in attainment, we have to start changing how we prepare, right? How we get our kids ready, how we invest in them. So any thoughts on just like, what can we do? What do we do to dismantle some of these challenges for students?
Well, it has to start very early on. I mean, we can't wait till high school.
Right.
You've got to start in elementary, because if we start putting people in front, like I was tracked from a very young age. So it's how do we engage actually in the elementary school level, and then junior high or middle school. By high school, as you know, you're already in a path. So I think it's that. I think, again, it's the power of the parent or caregiver.
Right.
The more your organization can actually lean in and create confidence with our caregivers, our parents, so they feel they can become the advocates for their child, and go to the school board meetings, and show up on campus and talk to the principal and say, what about this? That, again, is huge, because they're the best advocate. They know their child, and they know what their child needs. As a mother, I hoped I wasn't the helicopter parent, but it was clear people knew that I was very invested in my son's education, and I paid attention, and I talked to him a lot about what he wanted to do. And so through that experience, I learned that we all do differently,
Sure.
right? My son is very different from me. And so the way he got through school was going to be unique for him and not my experience. So we also need to understand that it's not one size fits all.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd love to close our conversation out with a couple of questions. What is the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, I've gotten so much advice over the years. I think the best advice I actually got from my grandmother, and it was many years ago. I spent a lot of my younger age getting a lot of feedback from people. And she ultimately told me, Anna Maria, you have a very short space in your life. The front row seats in your life should be reserved to those who want to support you, who will give you tough feedback, who will, help guide you, tell you, no, maybe you do it a little differently. But at the end of the day, even with the toughest feedback, it's given out of heart, it's given out of love, and they want you to succeed. And so that was probably the best advice. I spent a lot of years listening to people that maybe at the end of the day didn't want me to be successful because it came from that scarcity mindset. If she fails, then there's more room for us versus there's plenty of room around the table.
Absolutely.
So that's probably the best advice I've gotten. And Brené Brown, I don't know if you read Brené Brown.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I love Brené Brown.
Yeah.
My motto is feedback's a gift, growth is optional. But I've also learned from Brené Brown that she only takes feedback from people who are in the arena fighting the battle with her.
Oh, absolutely.
She doesn't take feedback from people in the cheap seats that aren't in the game.
Yes. Get in the game.
Get in the game.
Get in the
because the
game.
game's hard.
It is hard, and you bring up such a great point because I feel like when we have conversations about equity, access, opportunity, justice, and racism, it gets uncomfortable. And so we want to be able to create space to sit in the uncomfortable so that we can change, right?
Yeah. Well, and to be compassionate, I've been a civil rights attorney for 25 years. I've been doing this for 25 years. I remember doing a legal clinic around these issues, again, a long time ago. And even now, after 25 years, sometimes I struggle to have these very emotional discussions around race and ethnicity and inclusion. So those of us who even consider ourselves a little bit more experienced still struggle in those conversations.
Sure.
And, I think it's going to take compassion and empathy.
Absolutely.
As we move forward and understand we're not going to get it right the first time. And that, again, we've just lived through a once in 100-year pandemic.
Right.
Let's give people some grace.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. I'm over here for those watching. I'm over here like cheering in my head and snapping my fingers. All right. So giving us the best advice. Now, what is the worst advice you've ever received?
Oh, the worst advice. Oh my goodness. I don't know if it's the worst advice, but it's almost the advice I never got.
Mm-hmm.
So where I've made my biggest failures and stumbled the hardest is because, again, I'm normally hired to come into a legacy organization that is struggling, right?
Sure.
Every organization I've been the head of, I've been brought in because the business model has been in decline for 10 years. The revenue model has been in decline for 15 years. Membership, right? All of those issues. And so I jump into these legacy organizations, normally know no one, and then quickly have to assemble a team to drive massive transformational change, not incremental change, transformational change. And where I have actually gotten not very good advice is actually lack of advice. So not figuring out quickly enough the people in the ecosystem of that organization who've been in the organization for a while, who can see me as a leader, making decisions, listening to other people's advice, and then realizing the steps I'm taking, I'm about to hit the red brick wall of culture in the organization. That everybody who's been in the like services sees because they've been there, they know it, and they kind of sit there and they're like, ooh, I'm just going to hit that wall. It's about 100 feet from here. It's 100
And
feet.
they watch you do
And
it.
they watch it, and then it's 50 feet away, and then it's 10 feet away, and they're all like, "Ooh, she's about to hit it. You want to take a picture? She's about to hit it."
Ooh.
And then boom, you hit it as a change agent. That to me has been the toughest part. And the most reflective part of my career is trying to figure out who will be honest with me and tell me before I hit that culture wall. And so that would be my biggest advice to any leader. Surround yourself with people who are going to be kind and giving you feedback,
Sure.
but giving you straight feedback.
Thank you so much. That is great advice. Thank you all for joining us. And wow, what an incredible conversation. I walked into this knowing that I was going to learn a lot from you as a big fan of your work. So it is such an honor and a privilege to sit next to you, to share space with you. Thank you so much for being here. We're so grateful for the opportunity and look forward to continuing the conversation with you in this great role that you hold for school board leaders across the country.
Thank you. And thank you for your service and what you do every day for the children in Arizona. Thank you. You're doing an amazing job, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next time.